and today we will discover the difference between red team and blue team. Apologies in advance for my highly nasal voice. I have a flu right now, so bear with me while we dive into the difference between red teams and blue teams. Today we'll discuss this in terms of four broad categories. We'll discuss history of the term, we'll discuss the definition of red team and blue team respectively, we'll then discuss the techniques and activities used by red teams and blue teams respectively, and then we will discuss the methodology used by red team and blue team respectively. So moving on to the history of the term red team and blue team. Si- since we for these terms we can thank our military ancestors, because since the dawn of military conflicts, battle simulations and war games have been conducted in one form or other. While not directly related, red teaming and blue teaming can trace its roots back to these adversary simulations being performed by ancient militaries. In the early 1960s, the term red team and blue team was first appeared in the Department of Defense decision makers policies. The Department of Defense decision makers use these terms when referencing to the structured simulations they used to test high-level strategies. So, then these terms were carried over into cybersecurity, and they were used to describe teams which which did similar work to those in the military as well, which we'll discuss next. Moving on to the definition of red team and blue team. Red red team is basically an act of systematically and rigorously, which is also ethically identifying an attack path that breaches the organization's security defense through real-world attack techniques. In adopting this adversarial approach, the organization defenses are based not on the theoretical capabilities of the security tools and systems, but their actual performance in the presence of real-world threats. Red teaming is a critical component in accurately assessing the company's prevention, detection, and remediation capabilities and maturity. An extension to the red team is the tiger team, which is not quite a red team, but they are kind of like a special forces of the red team that is put together to solve a special problem or attack a very specific vulnerability. So, meanwhile, blue teams are the opposite of red team. If red team is playing offense, then the blue team is playing defense. Typically, this group consists of incident response consultants who provide guidance to the IT security team on where to make improvements to stop sophisticated types of cyber attacks and threats. The team is then responsible for maintaining the internal network against various types of risk. So, in summary, red teams are offensive security focused. They simulate how a possible attacker would attack the cybersecurity defenses. Blue team, on the other hand, are defense focused. They architect and maintain the protective internal cybersecurity infrastructure of an organization. Moving on to the activities and techniques used by red team and blue teams. Red team gather threat intelligence and then map it against all the information against known adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, which is also part of the attack MITRE framework. Specifically, red teams look to exploit cybersecurity controls and corporate environments by any means necessary, which include: number one, penetration testing, which is also known as ethical hacking and involves a tester trying to gain access to a system using software tools. Number two, physical security breach. This involves the hacker actually going to a organization premises and trying to physically access a computer or server in person. Wireless access, which involves the person or the red team operator trying to gain access to the system remotely. Furthermore, it also includes Active Directory exploits, which is also known as the crown jewel of an organization, as it includes, as exploiting it will gain access to the domain rights. Certainly. And then also it includes social engineering techniques, which involve a red team operator trying to use threats or enticement or even seduction in trying to gain access to a corporate network. Blue team, on the other hand, are different, use different activities and techniques. Blue teams perform all of the security operations center functions and are generally responsible for security information and event management, incident tracking, threat intelligence, packet capture, and analysis. Their activities include, but are not limited to, the following: endpoint protection, logging, network security monitor event collection, network security monitoring by network layer, continuous security monitoring, data centralizations, and incident response. Now, when we are discussing, we can see that the red team and blue team activities are totally opposite. While one tries to attack a corporate network, the other tries to harden the corporate network to make sure that no one can access it without permission. So we summarizing this, we can see that both work opposite to each other, where one team's objective is basically the other's team demise. Basically, if the red team gains access to the network, then the blue team has failed. If the blue team has hardened the infrastructure to such a level, then the red team has failed. So moving on to the methodology used by red team first. Now, the methodology used by red team can be divided into 6 stages. They usually use this 6-stage process to access a corporate network. They start with reconnaissance, which is basically the practice of covertly discovering and collecting information about a system. Then they move on to weaponization. Now, weaponization phase is where the red team operator actually includes a malware weapon like a virus, worm, or such other to exploit the vulnerabilities of the corporate network which he or she is targeting. Now, then he moves on to the delivery. Now, the delivery phase is where you actually put the weaponized payload which you deliver into the corporate network. Now, this can include techniques like social engineering, for example, phishing, as well as other techniques. Now, for exploitation is where the malware starts the action it is supposed to take. For example, someone, for example, opens the delivered payload, and then the payload gives a remote access to the attacker. This is basically the exploitation phase of the methodology. Then we go to installation. Installation, in which the installation is where the malware actually installs a backdoor or an access point for the attacker or the red team operator. Finally, there are 2 things: command and control. Now, the command and control is where the malware actually gives the red team operator access to the network and system. And continued persistence is basically where the attacker tries to prolong his existence in the target network and tries to remain undetected for an extended period of time in the target network. Blue team methodology, on the other hand, is totally different. Blue team methodology starts with taking an inventory of all assets, including hardware, software, cloud data, and data flows. Then we conduct an information security and business risk assessments to determine your current security procedure and risk appetite. Basically, how much risk can your organization absorb. Then we move on to assessing your current security exposure, which is basically where you conduct network vulnerability scans and penetration tests to understand how exposed you are on a threat basis. Step number 4 includes where you document your desired state, where basically you document what you want and then you move on to policies, controls, and procedure, which is also where you document your strategies and tactics and formalize your policies and controls and procedures and put them in a document, so that which usually include what you will do if an incident occurs, and how will you what are your disaster recovery techniques, and what checks are in place for certain types of incidents or certain types of attacks, for example. Then you move on to developing internal security offerings, which is basically where you actually tie your results of risk assessment and business risk assessment into a service catalog. And then you finally move on to the gap analysis, which is where you actually identify your current security state, and the state you want, where you analyze the gap between them, and then basically you analyze where the shortcomings are, and then in the implementation stage you implement your security features that enhance your security posture. And then finally you move on to integration, and you integrate it with your secure ongoing operations, which include SecOps, IT operations, I mean the system development life cycle, for example. So basically this, thank you for listening to me, and we'll see you in the next video, and I hope you enjoyed.